Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
Welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. Good to have you with us on the show today. And thanks, by the way, to all who have jumped on board and subscribed to the podcast over the last little while. As we've talked about, the work that we do here, I think, is so important. It's essential, I think, in our democracy to maintain some dialogue and to have it based on truth, evidence-based, as opposed to some of the wild speculation that's going on. And a number of you have agreed with that, certainly, and based on the comments that you've given us, the feedback that you've given us, you like what we're doing, and I thank you for that. That's wonderful to hear, but keep it coming. The stronger we get, of course, the better we can do our job to try to bring you the real stories about what's going on, which is, by the way, the subject of what I want to talk about on the show today. It's about Pierre Poilievre's rather sick obsession with Justin Trudeau, first of all, and the fact that Poilievre, of course, is one who just basically ignores the truth and has never let the facts get in the way of spreading salacious rumors or stories about anybody. And it reared its ugly head once again over the last couple of days with an interview that has popped up on social media, where Poilievre essentially says that Justin Trudeau should be jailed. It was a scathing condemnation of Trudeau and of the RCMP. And the gist of a lot of the comments from Pierre Poilievre was that Trudeau broke all kinds of laws when he was Prime Minister, and the RCMP covered it up. Now, we should mention right off the top that he offered no evidence to back that up. But, you know, when you're spreading lies, you don't have evidence, right? But you just put it out there. And, you know, the people that want to believe it are going to believe it. But it's about time that we did some fact-checking on some of the stuff that Poilievre is getting out there. The reference, of course, has to do with a couple of different things that happened that we talked about on the podcast. We've talked about on my radio show for many, many years. Some of the indiscretions and maybe, you know, evidence of going over the line in some stuff that Trudeau did. The Aga Khan vacation early into his term, of course, as Prime Minister. That has been adjudicated. That has been investigated, yes, by the RCMP, by the Ethics Commissioner, and on and on and on. And it was, by the way, found that, yeah, he did step over the line. Nobody said he broke any laws. Nobody, including the RCMP. But Poilievre says that he should have been arrested and charged with that. Now, what we did hear from the RCMP, just to give you a quick reminder, was that, yes, they thought there were some violations of those codes, but they didn't think there was a chance of a prosecution because of the fact that the rule, as it's stated, simply says that allowed to accept gifts of that unless your superior gives you permission to. Well, Justin Trudeau, as the Prime Minister, or anybody as the Prime Minister, is their own superior. So they said anybody that tried to pursue that, the Prime Minister could simply say, well, I said it was okay, so it's okay. It's kind of a silly rule, but that was the rule that was in play. Now, Pierre Poilievre doesn't give a damn about that. He simply wanted a picture. He wants a picture in his mind, and he wants a picture for all Canadians to see Justin Trudeau in handcuffs being led away by the RCMP. Even if he doesn't get convicted, the fact that it's happening is the picture that he wants to do. And you put that, of course, on every piece of campaign literature. It really kind of validates what we've talked about Poilievre doesn't have any interest at all in the good of this country right now. It's his own political interest that he's pursuing here, and he'll say anything and do anything to try to promote himself. He goes on like this. He talks about SNC Lavalin, too, and said that he probably broke the law and should have been charged. They investigated that, too, and there were no laws broken. It was ethically incorrect what he did. Although, as we've mentioned at the time, many prime ministers, many ministers in government over the years, not just in that administration, of course they try to lobby and influence decision-making on some of these things. It blew up in his face, and that was bad for the country and, you know, bad for Trudeau too, but it was not worthy of charging and pursuing criminal activity. But Poilievre doesn't care about that. He wants to dredge it up again. And this is what I'm just gobsmacked by, this obsession that this guy has with Justin Trudeau. He hates the guy. That's pretty obvious. But, you know, just to maybe remind Mr. Poilievre, because he seems to forget all the time, Justin Trudeau's not a player anymore, buddy. He's not the Prime Minister. He's not the leader of the Liberal Party. And he's not the guy that defeated you in the last election. But instead, you see, Poilievre is always looking in the rearview mirror because his politics and his methodology here is based on hate. And the best way to feed hate is with misinformation that's going to stoke those flames of anger and distrust. Problem is he's directing that at the wrong guy. All right, Trudeau's off the map, doing whatever he's doing, and the focus here should be on what the challenges that are facing this country right now. But Poilievre doesn't have a whole lot to say about that. He'd rather go after these salacious ideas about Justin Trudeau, and it reminds me, and I think it's a very strong reminder of the parallel that we've drawn on the podcast for many, many years since this guy was around, that Poilievre is Maple MAGA. He's the Canadian version of what's going on with MAGA and Donald Trump. And that it's become more and more obvious, especially with these assertions. Justin Trudeau should be in jail. He probably broke the law, and then they covered it up. Does that sound eerily familiar? Does it? Remember Donald Trump? Hillary Clinton, throw her in jail, lock her up. Remember those calls? No justification for that. But, the people that hate the other side, in that case, the Democrats, in this case, people that hate liberals or hate Justin Trudeau, they feed off this stuff. And Poilievre is just stoking those flames to try to get that sort of a reaction from people. Trump said, look at the Trump record. Throw Hillary in jail. He wants Joe Biden arrested and thrown in jail. He wants Barack Obama thrown in jail. He wants, now Jim Comey thrown in jail and John Bolton thrown in jail. He wants his political enemies jailed. That's the stuff of third world nations. That's authoritarian government at its prime. And this is what Poilievre is advocating right now. So be very afraid that the Trump influence is starting to seep deeper and deeper into the Conservative Party. Not all of them, to be fair. Story over this past weekend, reported in a couple of different sources in the Canadian media, says that there are a number of people in the Conservative Party that are very concerned about Poilievre's comments and his attitude and his actions over the last little while, but they're afraid to speak up because they're afraid of ramifications from the leader. Well, that's how things get out of control. Good people who say nothing and do nothing when they see something that's going on that is incorrect or illegal or wrong. If you don't speak up, this stuff festers. And we've seen this happen with authoritarian governments. That's how Hitler rose to power, of course, in Germany, how Mussolini did, how authoritarian governments like Orban in Hungary and so many others. And Poilievre would love to see that repeated here in Canada. He's watching what's going on in the States. He's watching the MAGA folks basically doing what he's been trying to do up here for the last little while. And he's not going to give up because there is a base in the Conservative Party that truly believe that kind of authoritarian government is the best kind, because obviously there are going to be winners and losers, and they're going to be the people that are going to be on top and making the decisions. It's pretty scary. And I know that, there are people in this country that are saying, oh, come on, you're exaggerating. It could never happen here. They said that about the United States, too. And it's happening right in front of their eyes. So we need to be aware of this. We need to understand what's happening in this country, and we need to pay attention to what Poilievre is saying. And some people are, thankfully. Even with these comments about Trudeau being tossed in jail and that the RCMP was in cahoots with them, which I find laughable, frankly. The RCMP is independent of government, and these assertions that, they're cozying up to the political leaders. You'll notice that that's always something that's said when something happens or something is done that they think should have warranted jailing or charging or whatever the case might be. So they obviously have to throw everybody into the same bushel and say, they're all in cahoots. I mean, talk about paranoia. But that's one of the hallmarks of authoritarianism, isn't it? That either you're with us or you're the enemy. And that's basically what Poilievre is doing right now. It's certainly following Trump's playbook, as he's done with so many different other things. It's a sick obsession with Trudeau, but it bleeds into other aspects of this, too. The parallels between Poilievre and Trump. Look at his recent comments about immigration. Immigrants are to blame for the crime rates in this country, even though, by the way, the crime rates are decreasing. He doesn't want that to be part of the discussion. Immigrants are to blame for the housing crisis. Immigrants are to blame for youth unemployment number. I mean, what's next, Pierre? What are you going to say? Hey, they're eating our dogs and our cats. It's those immigrants. I mean, I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's what Trump did. And Poilievre is Trump's mini-me. Like the bad guy in Austin Powers. Remember that? There was Dr. Evil and there was little mini-me. Well, Trump is Dr. Evil, certainly, but Poilievre is becoming mini-me. He's the little guy that wants to repeat everything and hope that people are going to notice him, just like the big guy, the big evil guy in that movie. Well, Trump's the big evil guy here, and Poilievre is the wannabe MAGA guy, the Maple MAGA guy here, and he has his followers. It should be troubling to us that when we see Ipsos polls and a couple of others that have come out of it, Abacus was another one that came out, that suggested that a high percentage, I would suggest an alarmingly high percentage of people within the Conservative Party believe that Donald Trump's doing everything right. that they think that's the way that the country should be governed. And that's frightening that that's going on in this country. It shouldn't really surprise us because we see that from Poilievre and some of his stronger supporters, that they're really simply mirroring what's going on with Donald Trump. And it's something that we really, I think, have to talk about in this country because we don't want to see that happen here. These are difficult times. We understand that. But if you're going to resort to the kind of politics that Trump is using these days, we don't want to put ourselves in the same position. As we've talked about before, once you go down that road and once you give those people, like a Donald Trump and Poilievre in this case, a foothold, it's very, very difficult to turn things around. And we don't want to get to that point. Let's avoid the precarious position right now and understand exactly what's going on. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, there are some people who are speaking up about this, and some people within the Conservative Party that are speaking up about this. There's an op-ed piece that appeared this past weekend in the Toronto Star from Dimitri Soudas. He was a senior advisor under the Stephen Harper government, and he has really blasted Poilievre for what he said, suggesting that basically his leadership approach remains rooted in grievance rather than governance. It's an interesting twist on these, but I think there's an awful lot of truth in that. He goes on to write, in a rule of law democracy, no opposition leader should ever call for a prime minister or any political rival to be jailed. He said it undermines the confidence in our justice system, our federal police, and ultimately the Crown. And he's right. Now, I know there are some people who are going to say, yeah, well, they're all, in cahoots anyway. Well, yeah, those are the disciples of the MAGA movement, right? And we can't listen to them. We can't let them be the voice in this country right now. Corey Teneka, who also was an advisor during the Harper government, has spoken up about this too, suggesting that Poilievre's comments were, I think, absurd and a political misstep, which is, I guess, putting it mildly. He says, I think it's quite Trumpian in tone, which I don't think is really where the Canadian electorate is at these days. Tenek goes on to say, he says, I don't think it's one that's broadly shared by conservatives that I speak to either. It's looking and sounding too much like Trump. And that was a big liability for Poilievre for Canadian voters in the last election. Well, we haven't changed our minds, Pierre. And I know that, we wondered after you lost your seat and of course, lost the election, and had to go to the by-election, that maybe there'd be a different Poilievre, maybe a little more humble, maybe a little more understanding of the political dynamic. Well, no, you got the same guy all over again. As a matter of fact, it's maybe even more severe than it was before. The idea about bringing conservatism to a different level, to bring Trumpism, to bring Maple MAGA to a different level. Quoting Charlie Kirk and so many others, including Trump, obviously, not by name, but by policy and by philosophy. And I know that he's playing to a very strong and very extreme right-wing base within the party. And I'm not lost with the idea that, of course, we know that there's going to be a leadership review early next year out in Calgary. He'll win that for a couple of reasons. First of all, there's nobody challenging him. There's nobody else that says, I want to be the party leader. And, in other words, there's no alternative. And secondly, like you say, they're afraid of political reprisals if they speak up too loudly about this. And again, we see that happen in the States, don't we? I like to think that there are a lot of people within the Republican Party south of the border that disagree with Trump and think what he's doing is wrong, but they're afraid because Trump has already vowed that if those people speak up, he's going to run people against them. He's going to make sure they don't get their seat back. He's going to have all sorts of stuff rain down on anybody who speaks contrary to what Trump wants to see happen. And do you really want that kind of government in this country? We really need to ask ourselves that, because it's not necessarily going to happen, but if we simply stay here and do nothing and listen and watch this happen and watch this fester, the possibility of it growing in this country is real. And we need to understand exactly what's happening, what the implications are. There are people, this is not just they're liberals and NDPers, so of course they're going to hate what the conservatives are doing. These are conservatives, some very, very prominent conservatives that are speaking out. And I know that some people within the Harper group, of course, are simply saying, well, he doesn't speak for Stephen Harper. Well, Stephen Harper has kind of wrote his own path here, okay? He's the president of the organization that advocates for strong right-wing governments around the world, including people like Orban, who he admires. Authoritarian governments seem to be the mindset of an awful lot of people in the right side of the Conservative Party these days. And by that, I mean the extreme right politically, not the wrong versus right side of the party. So that's there. And the implications and the ramifications of these sorts of things are something that we need to talk about, and what I want to talk about on this podcast time and time again. And again, the characterization of anybody who's not in cahoots with Poilievre and his extreme Maple MAGA, in this case, policies is, well, they're the radical left. Again, there's another phrase from Donald Trump, isn't it? I mean, he's borrowing from the playbook here. He's plagiarizing Trump, for heaven's sakes. He doesn't even have an original thought in his head. He's simply mirroring everything that Trump is saying. That anybody who is opposed to this is radical left. And this is where you get into the thing about, the organizations that Trump is basically, imagining, Antifa being one of them, of course, saying anything that protests what Trump is doing, well, they're Antifa. There's no such thing as Antifa. Antifa is a short form of anti-fascist, all right? And we should all, would hope anyway, be anti-fascist. Those are people that are against the kind of government that Hitler, Mussolini, and others, including Putin, have advocated and sadly, in many cases, imposed on the people of their particular countries. That's anti-fascism. And the people that are rallying right around North America, mostly in the States, of course, with this the No Kings rally, is basically, that's the message that they're giving. No Kings basically means there is no one person that rules. It's supposed to be a democracy. It's supposed to be government of the people, for the people, by the people, not somebody who thinks that they're king and they can make all the decisions arbitrarily. That's what Trump is, and that seems to be what a number of people in the Conservative Party, especially Pierre Poilievre, are advocating for here in this country. It's something that we need to talk about, and we're going to continue to talk about it on this podcast, and we're going to continue to call people out that are putting their own personal gains and their own personal extremist philosophies ahead of what's best for this country right now. We don't need this crap. You got enough challenges, enough problems going on economically right across this country, and we need to be focused on that. And, when Prime Minister Carney talks about, one team and the Canada team, but going forward on this, he's not doing this from the standpoint of you're with me or against me. He's saying we've got to do this together. And he's evidenced that, and most of the premiers seem to be on side with that. The opposition party, Poilievre, is clearly indicated that he has no intention of trying to work cooperatively with this government. And it just reminds me of something that I've talked about here on the podcast many, many times. And I think Poilievre is the personification of this. Don't just listen to what they say. Rhetoric is cheap. Words are cheap in politics. Watch what they do, because that's the real tell of just where they're coming from and what their intentions are. And we're going to continue to do that on this podcast. That's it for this edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast. Thanks, as always, for being with us. If you're on YouTube, please hit that notification bell and pass the word on this. And as we talked about at the beginning of the show, thanks to all for subscribing and joining us and supporting us on this. We really do appreciate your support and look forward to the continuing that support and having some new folks come on side as well so we can continue to do this work. Thanks to Madeline Kelly for the great work putting this one together. Until next time, I'm Bill Kelly. Stay in touch. And most importantly, stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.